It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, NCDHHS, is facing the elimination of over 80 jobs and the loss of more than $100 million in funding due to the termination of several federal grants. The lost funding affects key health initiatives, including immunization efforts, infectious disease monitoring, behavioral health, and substance use disorder services. Local health departments at universities and hospitals relying on these funds have been advised to pause some of that related work until further guidance is provided. The development coincides with a sweeping restructuring of the United States Department of Health and Human Services under President Donald Trump's executive order on government efficiency. The overhaul includes a reduction of 10,000 full-time employees within the HHS at the national level, as well as the consolidation of 28 divisions into 15 and the creation of the Administration for a Healthy America to streamline operations. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. stated that the changes aim to cut bureaucratic waste, refocus on combating chronic illnesses, and save taxpayers more than $1.8 billion each year. Additionally, HHS is rescinding more than $11.4 billion in COVID-19 related funds, citing the end of the pandemic and the conclusion there. We'll have some more details coming up here on that in just a few minutes. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:06, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. It is hard to believe that we are now 6 months removed from Hurricane Helene and the devastation and destruction left behind in the wake of that storm, September of last year. Since then, of course, major discussions taking place across the state of North Carolina about how we go forward with some of those rebuilding and recovery efforts. We've got some details this Monday morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Teresa Opeka from CarolinaJournal.com joins us to talk about a plan submitted by Democrat Governor Josh Stein. Teresa, thanks for the time this morning. Walk us through what the governor has submitted in regards to a large disaster recovery grant.
Yes, good Monday morning, Nick. Thanks for having me. So last week, Governor Stein submitted the paperwork for the proposed action plan. It is for the $1.4 billion Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Grant for Western North Carolina. So what that plan does, it outlines the main plans like providing grants for reconstruction, funding of construction for units for purchase for low and moderate income households, and it also establishes a small rental and multifamily construction program. So the governor did submit the plan to HUD, that's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, for approval after getting some feedback from the public after a 30-day public comment period. And HUD can take up to 45 days to approve that plan and finalize the grant. So Stein said North Carolina, and last week he said it was the fastest state to have submitted a plan following a major hurricane in the past decade. So out of that $1.4 billion allocated to the state for Helene relief, $807 million is allocated to owner-occupied unit reconstruction and rehabilitation, which means it's going toward housing. So very important that they got that in under the deadline, and they're also getting some funding from the state. We'll talk about that as well. So that all took place last week. As you mentioned, 6 months, it seems hard to believe, but of course, people who are living that every day, it seems that they're probably just stuck in this endless purgatory of every day. It's the same thing. So hopefully want to get something moving and getting it moving fast.
You mentioned this plan was, of course, submitted to the federal government, that $1.4 billion community grant, and it normally takes around 45 days. Teresa, do we have any ideas with all of the shakeups ongoing right now in Washington, D.C., if that deadline is still relevant, or is it possible that this takes potentially longer with all of those major parts moving around up in Washington?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that's probably up in the air. You would be hopeful that it will be the 45 days or possibly less. That would be awesome if it was. But we're seeing cuts everywhere. We're seeing cuts. Had a story last week about HHS which is the health department that Robert Kennedy is now heading, cutting jobs, moving around divisions, and that led to North Carolina DHHS possibly cutting up to 80 jobs, and they're going to lose about $100 million in funding for federal grants, things like that. That's an example how things are just changing so rapidly against the spectrum as far as the federal government. So 45 days, we're being hopeful, but it's anybody's guess at this point. And I'm just being honest about that.
Well, and I think one thing maybe that North Carolinians listening this morning can take some solace in is President Trump has continually talked about Western North Carolina. I'll remind folks, it was back in his just a couple days into his presidency. The first time he left D.C., Teresa, it was to fly to Western North Carolina to talk with families, to talk with both state and federal officials about the disaster cleanup. He's made the point over and over again that Western North Carolina voters won't be forgotten, and I guess this is an opportunity for him and his administration to actually put those words into practicality here and get some of this money flowing.
Oh, yes, you are correct. And he's not neglected to mention North Carolina. He mentioned it in his State of the Union address. That's been top of mind for him. Western North Carolinians have a right to be hopeful when it comes to President Trump and his promises to that part of the state after what they've been through last year. You are correct.
Now, we're talking about the federal dollars, but last week as well, it might be important to remind folks that the governor actually signed his first bill into law. That was a disaster recovery act that is set to dole out nearly $500 million from the state coffers to continue those relief efforts. So, Teresa, even though it's been a long road, 6 months is not probably the greatest time frame in the world. It does appear that on both sides and all over the place, work continues and money continues to flow into the western half of our state.
Yes, it does. And I think it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. I mean, everybody wants to come together and reach out and help people in Western North Carolina. It does not matter. And Governor Stein has mentioned this in all his different, whether it's the state of the state or his inauguration address. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle, blue, red, politics doesn't matter in a situation like this. What matters is helping out your fellow man, helping out your fellow North Carolinian. And I think both sides can definitely agree on that. And they're all coming together as fast as they can. The main hindrance, of course, is red tape, any regulations that are there. I think Governor Stein said that they were looking to eliminate some of that, and hopefully the federal government would as well. So that would be the biggest hurdle that would have to clear, is any kind of regulations and red tape. But everybody can agree, people of Western North Carolina have suffered more than enough, and it's time to get things moving forward.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, Teresa, because yes, the money obviously is an important part of it. And estimated, at least as the last thing I saw, was estimated to be a $60 billion storm. Now that's all over damages, economic damages, and everything associated with it. A very, very large sum of money, definitely the largest in modern North Carolina history. But the money's only as good as quickly as the work can get done. And unfortunately, the state does not have the best track record, not only with regulation, but getting things done in an efficient and timely manner. And when it comes to recovering and dealing with natural disasters.
Yeah, that's right. And you're alluding to NCOR, North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency for the eastern half of the state, which again, nearly a decade later, there's over 1,000 homeowners still without a home from Hurricanes Florence and Matthew. NCOR did a spectacularly horrible job. You don't want to say spectacular in that fashion, but they did. There was just terrible, terrible oversight, and they failed miserably at it. So, Governor Stein is under a microscope now that, it got thrown in his lap because, of course, this happened last year through no fault of his own. But now people are going to be watching and scrutinizing WNC, his division that he set up to allocate money for Western North Carolina, as well as finish out NCOR and get these people into homes in the eastern part of the state. So you're right, the state does not have a great track record. Someone even said it should be a scandal across the U.S. So you really don't hear that. But yeah, it all boils down to people don't have homes. People are still suffering years later. And in the case of Helene victims, months later. We want to get this all wrapped up as humanly possible, as quick as possible.
Obviously, hurricane relief and recovery will be a main topic we'll continue to focus on. You can read more on Teresa's story by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. Teresa Opeka joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at your early Monday morning commute. A look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning. Hot.
We're heading back to Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts coming up Wednesday, April the 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. for WBT's News and Brews. And, of course, we'd love to see you there. All of your WBT friends will be in attendance to raise a glass with you and talk about the news of the day. It's WBT's News and Brews, Wednesday, April the 16th at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. Visit WBT.com for tickets and event details this morning. Cheers, and we look forward to seeing you. It's now 5:21. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT, and we continue to track details this morning out of wildfires burning in the western half of the state. The good news to pass along this morning, there are currently no mandatory evacuations in place as those fires do continue to scorch portions of Polk County. This is according to officials, forest fire and crew officials out in the western half of the state. The two big fires that we were tracking throughout last week, the Black Cove fire has burned more than 3,500 acres. Fortunately, its containment sits at 35% this morning, and the Deep Woods fire has burned close to 4,000 acres, and that sits at 32% containment. The much smaller Fish Hook fire, which was burning about 200 acres, is 100% contained. So fortunately, crews able to get a good work on this done over the weekend. Some rain expected across the region today will hopefully help them in their containment efforts. But fortunately, all of those mandatory evacuations have been rescinded as crews continue to work. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. In some other statewide news this morning, an audit released Thursday by North Carolina State Auditor Dave Bolek found that North Carolina Central University, NCCU, had over $45 million in financial reporting errors for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2024. Those errors included misclassification of expenses, inaccurate journal entries, and overstated or understated financial figures across multiple categories. Previous audits, both in 2021 and 2023, also identified significant deficiencies in NCCU's financial reporting. However, despite these issues, Bolek emphasized that the audit does not indicate financial distress for the university, and he did express confidence in the new leadership team at North Carolina Central, including Chancellor Carrie G. Dixon and Chief Financial Officer Lori Wilcox, both of whom have acknowledged the findings and have been committed and stated that they are committed to improvements such as strengthening internal controls, evaluating personnel expenses, and enhancing financial reporting training going forward. This is very interesting. We covered on Friday, North Carolina Central was the backdrop for an announcement by State Treasurer Brad Briner regarding a 12-week partnership between his office and OpenAI. We did also hear that NCCU was going to be making and has already made a major announcement regarding AI, artificial intelligence, and a program that they will have going on over there as well. So we've seen a lot roll out of the auditor's office over the last couple of weeks since Dave Bolek and his team have been in that position. We'll continue to track the details. You can read a much greater detailed list of everything that he found in that audit by visiting our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. A recent legal settlement between UNC Health and Duke Health will result in a brand new 102-bed hospital in southern Durham County that is set to open by 2032. This agreement follows a motion filed by UNC Health and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to dismiss an appeal in Certificate of Need, a con-dispute with Duke Health. The settlement resolves litigation over the approval and development of UNC Hospital's Cary campus, which will feature a 102 acute beds and 2 operating rooms. Additionally, Duke University Hospital will gain approval for new inpatient beds. This collaboration is the largest sign of growing cooperation between the two healthcare providers in the RTP area. In January, UNC and Duke both announced plans for North Carolina's first standalone children's hospital, a $2 billion project that will have 500 beds. That facility will also be somewhere in the Research Triangle region. The legal dispute stemmed from a state-mandated certificate of need process where DHHS had awarded UNC approval of a 40-bed hospital in Durham County over Duke. A split 2-to-1 ruling from the North Carolina Court of Appeals in August of 2024 had halted UNC's plans, citing zoning issues in its proposed site. That case was set to return to an administrative law judge before UNC and DHHS dropped their appeal. And if you have been tracking our show and listening to some of our news over the last few weeks, we have spent a lot of time talking about certificate of need and some of the radical changes that could be coming to con law here across the state of North Carolina. For those just joining us, certificate of need requires various health systems and health providers to go to the state itself, to the Department of Health and Human Services, and request a certificate of need. It's exactly what it sounds like, and then it is up to DHHS whether to approve that certificate or not. That has caused a major backlog in healthcare facilities across North Carolina, as various healthcare providers have consistently had their CON, certificate of need, certificates denied by DHHS, and it has led to rising healthcare costs across the state, with North Carolina continually in various studies falling in one of the top states for healthcare costs across the United States. Certificate of need does continue to restrict the market. Fortunately, in this case here, it looks like some of those legal challenges have been put aside, and this will open up this brand new facility. Again, a pretty major facility, 102 new bed hospital that will be opened in southern Durham County. We'll continue to track those details and pass them along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:28 in News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We'll get another look at your early commute for a Monday morning. A look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're in pretty good.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. North Carolina Governor Josh Stein submitted the proposed action plan for a $1.4 billion community development block grant disaster recovery, a CBDGDR grant, with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's HUD, for approval. The plan focuses on long-term recovery efforts in western North Carolina following Hurricane Helene and includes grants for home reconstruction, funding for low and moderate income housing, and a small rental and multifamily construction program. Following a 30-day public comment period, the plan was submitted for HUD's review, which can take up to 45 days. According to Stein, North Carolina was the fastest state in the past decade to submit a recovery plan after a major hurricane. Of the total funds, $807 million is designated for owner occupation under reconstruction and rehabilitation. The Division of Community Revitalization, established under one of Stein's first executive orders, will oversee that nearly $1.4 million worth of the grant's administration. The division, which is led by the Deputy Secretary, Stephen McGrath, gathered public input through meetings in 6 western North Carolina locations. The CDBGDR grants, which address housing infrastructure as well as economic revitalization, are used after other recovery resources have been exhausted. While awaiting federal approval, the state has already begun recovery efforts using $120 million in state funds allocated under the Disaster Recovery Act of 2025. However, the $1.42 billion in federal funds is expected to fall well short of the region's unmet housing needs. Additionally, a separate $225 million grant was awarded directly to the city of Asheville for local administration. So you can see between both the state and local municipalities, a lot of money beginning to flow into the western half of the state. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:37. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We've got a new opinion piece this morning over at carolinajournal.com about the importance of a healthy Main Street in cities and towns across the state and how that should be a bipartisan issue. David Larson, carolinajournal.com, joins us to discuss on the News Hour this morning. David, went through the headline of your piece. Walk us through some of the details this morning as to why you wrote this and why you think it's such an important issue across the state.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Nick. I guess, it's not necessarily a breaking news kind of thing. It's more of a broader point that I'm trying to make that's always kind of valid. But North Carolina has a lot of main streets that people come to visit. There's beautiful places at the coast like Manteo or, Beaufort or places like that. And out west, you have all kinds of nice little towns. There's Silva and various other ones, Boone. But I think often those main streets, especially in more, smaller population counties, are kind of blue dots in the middle of a more conservative area. And I guess the point of the piece is just that a lot of times conservatives feel like that's maybe not their territory, and it would benefit both sides, I think, for conservatives to enter in a non-polemical way, just as neighbors trying to fix practical problems in those areas. But it would benefit all sides to have that input from conservatives there as well, because these are often places everybody likes to go to, and if they end up skewing too far to one side, often you can lose some of that with bad ideas or all that kind of thing. So.
Well, I mean, I think you look at an example of a western town, and it's not a small town by any stretch of the imagination, but you look at a city like Asheville, which has been completely taken over by individuals on the ideological left side of the political aisle. And David, that's had major ramifications for the town and the city rather, and what they've been trying to do.
Yeah, and one of the examples I gave goes along with that. So I gave a few areas conservatives can contribute, and one of those was law and order, because I think to their benefit. I try to be give some of the progressives a benefit of the doubt in a way on their instincts being, well-intentioned and all that kind of thing. So I think with law and order, they're often well-intentioned people who think we don't want to crack down too hard, or maybe there's a marginalized group that hasn't traditionally been treated well, so let's not have too much police presence in this neighborhood or that kind of thing. So I think they're well-intentioned, but often if you don't have that balancing voice of conservatives often talking about, well, we do also need to protect business owners, or we do need to protect people who want to walk down the street or tourists. And there's a lot of people who don't go to Asheville anymore because it can feel dangerous. Or an example I gave also is in Oregon, there's not a lot of balance in their discussions. A lot of times it's fairly progressive universally. So they legalized hard drugs in a way where people were pretty much able to use open air drug use was basically signed off on, and possession of small amounts of hard drugs. And then after a couple of years, they have reversed themselves. They recriminalized all those things because it was a disaster. I mean, they had spiking in drug overdose deaths. They had, crime in a lot of their downtowns like Portland, which, similar issues to Asheville in some ways in terms of, there's homeless encampments, open air drug use, petty crime is often allowed because people don't want to be too harsh and the police aren't seen in a positive light. So that's definitely an example of something I think, conservatives, if brought to the table, if we're not too intimidated or think, oh, the town is where we'll just let progressives kind of run that. We have a lot to contribute, and it can make the wider area better because, a lot of these things can ripple out if there's a blue dot surrounded by the red ocean, but the blue dot starts to go bad in some way, that definitely affects the red and the surrounding areas too. It can ripple out to what everybody has to deal with.
Well, let me ask you this. Going back to your headline and going through some of what you talk about, you claim it should be a bipartisan issue. David, we hear that a lot. The question is, in our very hyper-politicized environment that we live right now in 2025, is there a way to truly get past that, break down the walls of partisanship and actually try and work for a better community, a better city, better town, whatever it might be, county as a whole? Is there a way to do that with the politicized nature of the times that we live?
I think the very local, hyper-local kind of conversations, often there is, because sometimes those right-left dynamics don't really map on to the hyper-local stuff quite as well. And housing is a good example because, a lot of the debates are between NIMBYs and YIMBYs, kind of these silly terms, people who say, not in my backyard, basically don't build a lot of things, and YIMBYs who say, yeah, go ahead and build a lot of things. We need more housing, we need more business, so build. Those don't really map on to national right-left very well. Like you have a lot of market urbanists, who are more to the right. I would put myself in that group where I think it's better to have density than to have like sprawling out and taking up former farmland and things like that. Just build the houses, and you don't need to have affordable housing programs if you build enough. And then there's people on the right too who are more protect single family zoning at all costs. So often those are some of the local issues. The lines between left and right don't really map on in the same way. So I think it's a way to, if you just set aside a lot of the national issues, because those can kind of poison local conversation.
Sure.
And try to solve problems. Okay, we have a lot of drug use or homeless encampments. Maybe even in, like I said, in Oregon, they were able to say this isn't good. Let's recriminalize it. Let's start arresting these people. So I think if something's practical like that, even if you wouldn't agree or maybe they vote differently than you, often you can find ways to solve your local problems that are, ways that look beyond the national categories.
David, it's a great piece this morning. Tell folks where they can go and read through it and get some additional details.
Yeah, so it's at carolinajournal.com. And, if you go to the opinion section, we have all kinds of opinion pieces there like that. And also just the daily news and the headlines is always coming up on CarolinaJournal.com.
David Larson joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at your early Monday morning commute. A look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. We're free and easy.
Hot.
WBT and Tommy D Productions presents George Norrie Live Saturday, April the 19th from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Booth Playhouse. The legendary George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM will lead an interactive evening featuring special guests Vincent Jania, Samantha Fay, and Danian Brinkley. The show will include questions and answers from George and his guests, as well as a salute to our country's military veterans and first responders, and George will even be there to sing a couple of songs as well. To top it off, Bo Thompson and Pete Callender will also be there to say hello. It's all presented in part locally by Monica the Medium at the Healing Tree Boutique, who will also be on site offering readings for a special price. It's George Norrie Live Saturday, April the 19th at the Booth Playhouse. Visit WBT.com this morning for tickets and details. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour 553, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Some great news out of Western North Carolina this morning. There are currently no mandatory evacuations in place as wildfires scorched portions of Polk County throughout last weekend and the entirety of last week. That's according to North Carolina Forestry Service officials. The two fires that we have been keeping an eye on first, the Black Cove fire, has burned more than 3,500 acres. Fortunately, it's now 35% contained, and the Deep Woods fire burned very close to 4,000 acres and currently sits at 32% containment. The much smaller Fish Hook fire burned 199 acres and is now 100% contained. And fortunately, crews able to get a hold on that over the latter part of last week and did continue to make some progress over the weekend. Some rain across the region will hopefully tamp down some of those fires as well. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Taking a look at some statewide news this morning, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services is looking at eliminating more than 80 jobs and will miss out on more than $100 million in funding due to the recent termination of several federal grants. A spokesperson said in an emailed statement to Carolina Journal late last week that the $100 million in funding directly contributes to the health, safety, and well-being of the people of North Carolina. They said that the federal grant funding impacts a number of areas of work, including immunization efforts, funding of the new NC Immunization Registry, the infectious disease monitoring and response programs, behavioral health, and the list goes on and on. Some of the impacted funding supports work that is completed by local health departments, universities, hospitals, and local departments of social services. NCDHHS is advising impacted vendors to pause all work supported by the funds until they learn more from the federal government. This announcement came on the same day that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced sweeping changes under President Donald Trump's executive order implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency's Workforce Optimization Initiative. The dramatic restructuring includes reducing about 10,000 full-time employees within HHS at the federal level and offering early retirement packages to others. That in total, it will result to a downsizing of nearly 20,000 employees from 82,000 currently working at HHS right now to just 62,000 full-time employees, netting taxpayers a savings of over $1.8 billion a year. Also, 28 divisions of HHS will be consolidated into just 15 divisions, including a new Administration for a Healthy America, or AHA. And it will centralize core functions such as human resources, information technology, procurement, external affairs, and policy all into other departments as well, with regional offices within HHS being reduced from 10 to 5, so that being cut in half. An HHS press release said that the overhaul would impact the department's new priority of battling chronic illness in America by focusing on safe, wholesome food, clean water, and eliminating environmental toxins. Some big-time shakeups at HHS at the direction of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the secretary, and some of those impacts here this morning across North Carolina. Well, that's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.